The Voice of Anton Bouchard. A Journey into the Mind of a Serial Killer. Introduction. What makes a serial killer? Some of the finest psychiatrists, psychologists and criminologists in the modern world have pondered that question. Is a serial killer born to it? Does a defective gene present in their biological makeup leave them devoid of feeling or compassion for their fellow man, leading them inexorably toward the destruction of life, becoming normal in their daily existence? Might they inherit the desire to kill? The child of a psychopathic murderer simply follows the genetic instructions passed on from his or her parents. Could science classify the evil they perpetrate as a medical condition, something treatable by drugs? The unpredictability of the serial killer makes them the hardest to identify and apprehend. More often than not, luck plays a major role in bringing these misfits of society to justice. Unfortunately, many remain free, and the corpses attributed to them continue to grow in number. In some cases, only the killer's own demise or aging brings their particular reign of death to an end. Another theory exists, however, one that has gained greater credibility in recent years. Many ex-soldiers returning from violent and traumatic experiences on the battlefield have found it increasingly difficult to adjust to civilian life on their discharge from the military, some of these unfortunate individuals themselves becoming killers in civilian life, unable to return to normality. After being desensitized by war, they view death as a normal part of their everyday existence and feel compelled to carry on where their military careers left off. So the theory goes that the mind may become so shaped and moulded by life events that trauma could turn a previously well-adjusted and respected citizen into that most heinous and reviled of murderers, the serial killer? In truth, we must confess that we simply don't know the answer. Perhaps one day, the specialists and psychiatrists will discover the cause of the aberration that leads one individual to lose so much of their basic humanity that they embark on the systematic and at times ritualistic murder of their fellows. Until that day arrives, we can only continue to wring our hands in horror and gasp at the terrible headlines that scream at us from the popular press as the struggle for understanding continues. Meanwhile, the minds of men and women such as Anton Bouchard remain closed to the world, and a clear and permanent danger to the unfortunates who unwittingly and tragically become drawn into their murderous web. So the next time you pass your neighbour in the street, remember the story about to unfold before your eyes, and remain vigilant. Always remain vigilant. Summer 2003. Paris. The mere name of the great French metropolis conjures up thoughts of romance and culture. Great palaces and art galleries abound, and tourists flock to the city of love in their droves year after year. Happy families pass through the French capital on their way to Disney World, and tourists in their thousands flock to view the famous sights of the Arc de Triomphe, the Élysée Palace, and the Eiffel Tower. In the stifling heat of one long and languid summer, however, Paris sadly became the focus of one of the great criminal investigations of the early years of the new century. Known by the popular press as the Butcher Beast, a seemingly invisible menace targeted attractive young women, subjecting them to horrific torture before finally ending their lives in brutal and bloodthirsty fashion. As the police carried out their investigation into the string of murders that grew longer with each passing week, The public called out for an end to the killings, for the police to do something to bring the beast to justice. The clamour for positive action, for results, grew louder as the murders escalated. Unfortunately for the people of Paris, in the absence of an identifiable motive for the murders, and lacking solid evidence of any kind, and with a killer at large who appeared able to cover his tracks perfectly before disappearing like a wraith into the hot, steamy night, the police appeared powerless in their efforts to solve the case. The killer appeared to target random victims, and with each new murder, the level of brutality grew steadily worse. Soon the streets of Paris would be devoid of women after dark. Fear would rule, and Paris risked becoming a no-go area for the fairer sex. Such an event would lead to a disastrous fall in the number of tourists visiting the city, with the subsequent financial consequences being felt across the whole of the capital. As the heat of summer increased, so too did the tension on the streets, and the pressure on the police to catch the killer became almost as unbearable as the temperature. No one knew who to trust and who to suspect. People began to suspect their neighbours, friends turning against each other on the slightest pretext. It seemed as if everyone had become a suspect in the eyes of the man in the street. Paris became the centre of attention for the world's media. CNN, CBS, ABC, the BBC and ITN, all there to report on the inevitable public fascination with the horrific murders. Oddly enough, every anchor, camera operator and technician from those overseas networks was male. No one wanted to place their female staff in any unnecessary danger. The inexorable heat bore down on the city, hanging like a heavy pall above the airless streets and boulevards, and many women began to refuse to leave their homes at night, at least without a trusted escort. Others, either foolish or unwary or both, decided that they wouldn't allow the intimidation wrought by the murders to take over their lives, and, ignoring the danger posed by the murderer, they determinedly went about their business as normal. Some, of course, had no choice. They had to work to survive. Most of them stayed lucky and lived. For an unfortunate few, however, their luck tragically ran out. Chapter 1. Anton sat quietly listening, head cocked slightly to one side, determined not to miss a word. He listened to the sound of the other's voice, hypnotic, the intonation soft yet persuasive. As always, Anton felt mesmerized by the almost musical reverberation inside his head whenever he heard that voice. Enraptured by the soothing voice, he felt cocooned from the world around him. Nothing and no one else existed, only the voice mattered. And Anton listened, captivated, and at the same time trapped by the voice in his mind. The voice slowly faded, receding into the far recesses of his mind, and Anton unconsciously answered in a low voice, I know. I understand what needs to be done. Are you all right, monsieur? The voice of the waitress suddenly cut in on Anton's thoughts. She had arrived at his table, intending to offer to refill his coffee cup, when she heard him talking, apparently to himself. Concern echoed in her voice as she asked her question. Eh? What do you want? Snapped Anton, with undisguised venom. I'm sorry, monsieur. I merely wondered if you would like a refill? The girl held up her gleaming stainless steel coffee pot, in demonstration of her offer. Anton's reaction had scared her. and she deliberately made no eye contact with her grouchy customer. "Yes, please, I apologize for snapping. I was just thinking aloud," said Anton. The girl allowed herself to relax a little and smiled in acknowledgement of his apology as she quickly filled his cup and turned on her heel, eager to withdraw from the strange, sullen man seated by the window. He watched her as she retreated behind the high counter at the far end of the café. His eyes penetrated deep into her back as she walked, taking in every detail of her walk, the gentle sway of her hips, her hair, the blonde tresses caressing her shoulders as she moved, and the sound of her shoes as they clacked on the shiny polished floor. Anton liked what he saw. The girl was just his type. She would fulfill his needs more than admirably. The name on the badge, pinned to her dress, identified her as Michelle. Yes, Anton would see Michelle again. As if on cue, he heard the voice again. His irritation with the girl, his oversensitive reaction, his sudden flash of anger disappeared, instantly forgotten as he listened quietly, intently, head once again cocked on one side. As the voice receded once again, Anton looked down at his hands. They were shaking. He placed his palms face down upon the checkered pink and white tablecloth, pressing down on the table until the shaking stopped. Anton felt as if he were drowning in a sea of unimaginable, uncontrollable grief, allied to a sense of losing his grip on reality. He tried hard to think rationally about the way his life had begun corkscrewing out of his control. When had it started? He asked himself the question over and over again as he sat, sipping his third sickly sweet black coffee, staring at the passing human traffic through the window of the street-side café. Just another anonymous customer in another anonymous café bar. When had the bloodlust that consumed him first begun to envelop his life? When had the voice within his brain first sent him out to accomplish that which had to be done? And it did have to be done. He knew that as surely as he knew his name, though no one would ever understand. He knew that with a surety as firm as his belief in the voice. Not that he agreed with everything the voice told him, of course. He was much too intelligent for that. Oh no, he often argued with the voice within until he became blue in the face, but somehow the voice always seemed to win, to overpower and subdue his sense of logic, his rationale. If ever the police apprehended him, he knew for sure that he'd be vilified, hated, probably declared insane. He wasn't insane, of course, though only he could testify to that if he were asked. Anton was 48 years old, and his once luxuriant dark brown hair had turned prematurely grey. He now kept it deliberately very short, so as not to emphasize the early aging process that had struck him soon after the arrival of the voice. He remained in great physical shape, and held himself erect when he walked, his tall frame towering over most of his fellow beings as he passed them in the street. His inner turmoil could perhaps have been betrayed by a visible sadness that showed in his eyes, but few people bothered to look that closely. He allowed himself to dwell on his thoughts for a minute or two before the answer to his own question revealed itself from within the deep recesses of his mind. 3 years. Or nearly so, he suddenly concluded. That's when it started, when he first heard that nagging, incessant voice, deep within his mind. Shortly after the Millennium celebrations, that's when it began.